Welcome, tennis fans, to a special U.S. Open edition of Changeover Chat in the TennisONE app. Today, we welcome to the show longtime tennis exec Bill Oakes. Bill and I have known each other for a while. He's held a number of executive positions in tennis. He was tournament director in Atlanta, Winston-Salem. He has held numerous positions with the USTA on both the national and southern section levels. And we're so happy to have you here, Bill.
Thank you very much. It's purely what a day, and especially men's professional tennis. But what a day!
Yeah, I mean, it really has been. Novak kind of snuck out of that match with Milos. It was probably a little bit tighter than people would think. Milos absolutely destroyed him in the first set, 6-1, and then Novak, as Novak will always do, came back and I think he won 6-4 in the third. But let's talk about, and then on the women's side, obviously, Naomi Osaka had to default her final, or it was a walkover essentially by Azarenka. So we'll see how she looks next week in the U.S. Open. Her injury does not sound that pleasant. So we'll see.
A hamstring is not a good thing to have a problem with.
No, not at all. So we hope she comes back strong next week. The tournament certainly needs her. So let's talk about, Bill, the news of the day off the court. Really, the last thing that tennis needed right now is an issue with the ATP Tour and executive management. And Novak and Pospisil last night, along with John Isner, say they're going to break off. Novak's obviously the head of the ATP Tour Player Council. They're going to separate from the tour, create their own representative union per se for the players. Unprecedented move. They called it the Professional Tennis Players Association. Roger, Rafa, other players chime in, say wrong thing to do, wrong timing, wrong everything. This body that you created can't coexist with the ATP Tour. Essentially, Bill, what the heck is going on here, and why now, and why?
Well, it just appears that Vasek, John, and Novak, to me, are tone deaf in really the reality of what goes on at the tour. When you read the statements that Vasek made about how it was to make it better for the players, and I just read Novak's letter to the players. If the issue, they talk about food and scheduling, and I don't understand how creating a players tennis professional association or whatever it's called is actually going to help them. The ATP was founded by 3 players in 1972, Donald Dell, Jack Kramer, and Cliff Drysdale, to protect the interest of the players. The tour is owned 50-50 by the players and the tournaments. And if there's a discussion that one of the things I've seen a lot of today in discussion groups has been that the players do not feel like, or the fans do not feel like the players are getting an equal share, a large enough piece of the revenue pie. I think you have to cut it into 2 different areas. Even within that, you have to cut it into the ATP events and to the non-ATP events, the Grand Slams. Right. The Grand Slams pay a much smaller percentage of total gross revenue to the players. They do. But all 4 Grand Slams also have significant things that they do, not only for their country's tennis growth, but around the world tennis growth. And they actually put in money to tournaments that, okay, maybe it's not a direct revenue fall from the US Open to US Open prize money, but the USTA takes those profits and then uses them to help fund tournaments that could be challengers, futures events, ATP and WTA events. So I don't know the exact amount of money they put in. They also help with coaching and a variety of other things, growing the game. So I think it's very difficult. The LTA does the same thing. The French Tennis Federation, the Australian do, and they actually fund some of the smaller federation, help fund some of the smaller federations around the world.
Right.
Then if you look at the ATP revenues, the 250s make on average about $125,000 net. That's the average for the 39 ATP 250 events. So if you don't think that if you think the players are not getting enough of that revenue, you're kidding yourself. Only I think it's 26 of those 39 actually made money, and 13 lost money the last time. So if you think that the players aren't getting treated well, that's 39 of the 62 events. Then you go to the 500s. They average approximately about $1 million net profit. But then, and then the 1000s average approximately $6 million in net profit. Okay. If you say, okay, well, gosh, the players aren't getting $6 million, they're also required to provide upgrades to the facilities. They're putting in monies to in capital improvements at all of their facilities. I don't care whether you're 250, 500, or 1,000. You're putting in money from that profit to help pay for capital improvements. So it's a difficult situation. I've had this conversation with many members of the Player Council over the years. I've presented to the Player Council. I've been in the room with the Player Council. I was in the room last year, right about the time that the 3 or 4 members quit the Player Council because of the inability to work with the tournaments. The other part that I find very difficult with this is the ATP had coordinated a way for the Tournament Council and Player Council to spend time together, so we can learn about each other's issues outside of a board meeting, outside of just having dinner. And when you look at the players from the Player Council who came to that dinner, you don't see Novak Djokovic. Pospisil came once. You don't see Rendy Liu, or what you saw was actually the guys who quit at Wimbledon were the guys who were probably the most involved. Right. Robin Haase, Sergei Stakhovsky, Jamie Murray. Those guys, they care and they understand. And Danny Valverde. I think you start looking at that, it's very difficult for me to understand where John, Vasek, and Novak are. And then when you look at the rest of the Player Council, Sam, Kevin Anderson, Roger Federer, Rafa Nadal, Bruno Suarez, and Melzer, they all think it's the wrong thing to do. Look, I'm not saying that the ATP is perfect, and how they manage is difficult, but having had to deal with and understand that you need to find ways that make it better for both organizations, the players and the tournaments, it is complex and it is not always the same. And then you throw in the last part is they aren't even going to include the women. And I find that very difficult to understand as well. If you're going to be a professional tennis players association, shouldn't you be all the professional tennis players? And so and then you also, I just know that many of the players in the Player Council are not in favor of combined events. They think that the men's tour has kind of propped up the women's tour in many ways. And I find that to be, just to be honest, ludicrous in some ways, and kind of offensive. I think that we need, though I will say that the WTA and the ATP need to talk more. And I know I've gone on this soapbox rant for a few minutes, but the ATP and the WTA players need to, and the organizations need to talk more. Here's an example that will be coming. The ATP and WTA are going to have different COVID rules when they are at combined events, and how those things. So what happens at a combined event? You test positive, you're a male player, you have to follow these rules. Or you, a member of your organization, is tested positive, you haven't tested positive, but let's say your stringer has, your private stringer or your physio. What does that mean? Well, on the women's side, that's going to have a different rule than it is on the men's side. To me, that's just not the best way for our sport to be governing itself. They need to be doing stuff together and finding ways to work together. And I've been really struggling with that, especially over the last 6-7 months.
Right. Well, let's get into the 250s. You represented the 250s, obviously, on the tournament council on the ATP, and certainly know a lot about that financial model. When you say in an average year, they're only netting out at about 150 grand net
Yeah, I
profit.
shared, to give you some background, I helped found the 250 Executive Committee a number of years ago, and I chaired the Executive Committee for its first 2 or 3 years of work. And it was made up of 6 250 tournament directors from around the world, members from each region, and we tried to help. We tried to serve as a lobbying group, but also an informational portal. And yes, the average 250 and the 250's average net profit is $125,000 US. It's one medium-sized sponsor away from being in the red.
Right.
So you're looking at that, and that's a very difficult business model. So if the players think that the 250s are not living up to it, and I mean, I hear this regularly, oh no, it's not the 250s, but you know what? When you act the way you are right now, you're lumping in all of tennis, because most fans don't understand that. And actually, many members of the media do not understand either.
Right. So 39 events, they're netting out at, as you said, about 150 grand. Bill, in a year like this where they didn't play any of these events, maybe a handful. I don't even know if there was a handful. I know the tournaments that we work with at TennisONE, Delray, Atlanta, Winston-Salem, Swiss Open Gstaad, none of those were played this year. How did those tournaments bounce back from a year where they didn't make any revenue? I mean, do they have massive reserves, or how are they going to come back from this? I'm obviously cheering for all of them. They are great clients of ours, and not 250, just 500s, thousands. I'm cheering for everybody. I don't understand how they come back. I know that they will come back, but it's going to be real tough, correct?
I think it's going to be very difficult. And I think many tournaments are being smart and creative in how they make it work. Some are asking for tournament sponsors to kind of give them some of their money for 2021 now.
Right.
And so you can get, I mean, I know a tournament here in the United States that has gone to their big sponsors and said, can you give us 30% or so of your 2021 sponsorship money as a down payment that allows us to kind of bridge for the next year. The other part is, the USTA I think is trying to work with its events to try and help them find a way to be successful, but it is difficult. It is not easy. And I think that there are going to be some tournaments that are going to be in real financial strain because you still have staff. Do you lay off your staff? Do you furlough them? I think tournaments are trying not to do that. I think they're trying to be good, responsible members of society. But it is difficult. And, every country, I mean, there are also numerous different countries. So laws and how you manage against that makes it difficult. I feel for many of my friends whose events didn't happen, or their owners, and how are they going to keep the tournament afloat for a year. And I actually don't think the first quarter of the year is going to go smooth. And when I say that, I don't mean like it's just going to be a cluster. I think there's just going to be challenges in the beginning of the year as well. And I think that those are going to be challenges that will probably, some things we still see right now will probably carry over to the first part of 2021.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to leave out the women in that conversation. It's the same. It's the same deal. When you have a WTA Premier, you have a WTA International here in the U.S. I wish we had more women's events. We obviously had Bob Moran's event in Charleston that didn't get played. That was one of the first to not get played. That was kind of on the bubble. And then you had San Jose IMG's event. And I guess they're in the same place. I mean, Bob's event, I was so sad when that happened. I like that event so much. And, it's the same thing. We're all hoping these tournaments can figure out the financial model to get back. And you're right, if first quarter isn't as much of a comeback quarter as we think, it's going to be tough for us in tennis. More from a mental standpoint.
Yeah, I think I agree, and I agree also on the WTA. There are fewer events on their tour. There are fewer events in the United States, and I think the Volvo Cars Open is a fantastic event. But so many of their events are good. I'm glad that Lexington was able to play and
Yeah.
play successfully. I think that was really great, and I really commend the USTA, J. Wayne Richmond, and all the folks that put on the Western and Southern event, that moving it from Cincinnati to New York, and really commend Western and Southern for their willingness to stick with it, and all the sponsors. Sean Leibold, who is their director of business development, I think has just done a magnificent job of keeping the sponsors engaged, because it is difficult. Saying many of those sponsors, Western and Southern, they do it because it's important to the city of Cincinnati. And so when you're taking what the reason they do it is for the community of Cincinnati, and you're moving it to New York, that's a difficult scenario. So I really commend all those folks that have stepped up to continue the event, and it's a fantastic event. And the USTA and the bubble has worked out really well from what I understand.
Yeah, and I've been obviously tuning into the Western and Southern in New York. I'm getting pumped for the U.S. Open. You're right, for the USTA to have had the not audacity, but the boldness and bravery to put this together in the bubble and actually see a Western and Southern Open that was pretty entertaining. I thought the players were as into it as they'd always be. It's such a surreal setting when you're watching it on TV, and they have the tarps and you see the Western and Southern logos on the grandstand. It was interesting. I think what it has done is acclimated the tennis fan to, okay, this is what the Open is going to look like. It's going to move over to Ash, but yeah, I think everybody is psyched to see the players back on the court for the Open. I'm sure ESPN's going to do a great job, as they always do. We're going to be covering the U.S. Open as we did the Western and Southern on the TennisONE app. So let's talk a little tennis. You talked about the bubble. The first thing I want to know is you've got a lot of friends in that bubble right now. How are they faring? I've heard some positive things. I've heard some negative things.
Talking to my friends that are in the bubble, they've been very supportive. They think that the USTA has done I think their expectations were not great, and it's difficult, but I think they're pleased by everything. From all the feedback I've gotten is people are pleasantly surprised. It is difficult, it is not easy, but they're also talking to what other pro athletes are facing in other bubbles.
Right.
And I think everybody's recognizing that this year is a different year, and you just have to learn to adapt to it. And some players chose not to participate because of a variety of reasons, health, or whatever. And I think that I commend everyone for what they're doing so far. And it's difficult, and people that are working on staff or people that have come up to the event and are working are finding it very different, walking around the venue and there's no one there. It's kind of eerie,
Right.
but I think from the staff, from people I've talked to who are working in the stringing office, to player services, to coaches and players, I think everybody's pleasantly surprised.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little tennis. I've got the draws up. As people know, Bill is not just a business person in the tennis world and an executive. Bill, you used to have your own talk show, didn't you? Where it was.
Yeah, I had a show that was on the Tennis Channel for a little bit called Match Point. It was filmed in Atlanta, and then for a number of years, I actually did radio broadcasting, color and play-by-play at the U.S. Open for a number of years, mostly the evening session, long nights. I can tell you, going until 2:32 in the morning watching Marty Fish play, and then
Right.
having to go do a voiceover after that's probably not the most fun. But I can, they played the same song going out every night. So Alicia Keys got on my, got in my head a lot.
Right. Well, so you're a great person to talk tennis with. I want to kind of break it down. I mean, I've got the draws in front of me here. We obviously can't do a bracketology show and like an NCAA tournament show and kind of go through this whole thing. even though I have no doubt that you're basically a Dick Vitale or a Jay Billis in doing this. I'd love to do a larger show, but I want to just, Bill, I want to focus on the Americans. I think that's the way to go. But before we start with the Americans, let's talk about Novak Djokovic. I had a conversation in the TennisONE app with Mark Lucero, an incredibly bright coach who coaches Stevie Johnson. And I said, Mark, it looks to me like because Roger isn't there, because Rafa isn't there, those kind of roadblocks that players always see. It's like, well, I can get here and then I've got to play Rafa. You've got Novak on the top half. And if you're on the bottom half, if you're nowhere near that guy, aren't you saying I might be able to make a huge run at this tournament? Because there's nobody that really scares you too much. Team has been all over the place. Zverev's been all over the map. I would think if I was out somewhere away from Novak, I might be able to make a big run at this thing.
I think the bottom half of the draw is so wide open because of exactly what Mark and you were talking about. Players are intimidated by the big three.
Right.
They can say whatever they want, but they are. And I think if you don't see the impending doom of Roger or Rafa on the bottom half of the draw, I think it certainly opens it up. It's going to make it very interesting.
Right.
You look at the bottom half of the draw, and I see some pretty interesting. I mean, I think Medvedev is still playing well. Obviously, Roberto Bautista Agut, both those guys have been champions at the Winston-Salem Open. I like both of them on the bottom half. I agree on team. I look at I look at Felix also as a guy who I think, over a 5-set match, I think he's fit. I haven't watched him play, and I didn't watch him play this week, so I have. But that's a guy who I wouldn't want to play. The guys that I will actually say this: the guys that are going to be involved deeply in this player union issue, I wonder how mentally focused they are.
Right.
And you look at the on-court and off-court, and because this is gonna take time. I mean, look, Novak's got a first-round match against Jumur, who I think he's played twice, and he's lost 4 games to, I think, or something like that. 5 games in 2 matches to Jumur. But you look at Kevin Anderson, who has not played well. He's coming back. He's playing Zverev in the first round. And you talk about Americans. I mean, Kevin, though he is listed as South African, he's lived in the United States. He's married to an American. He lives in South Florida. He is an American with a South African passport, in my opinion. Yeah. And I think the world of Kevin. But he's the vice president of the Player Council. I think he's going to be spending a lot of time on this. You talked about Stevie Johnson. Stevie plays John Isner in the first round. I think that's a fun, interesting match. Stevie has won the last 4 times they've played.
Right.
So Stevie has a 5-4 lead against John. He's won the last 4 times he's played. Yes, John is playing better today, in my opinion, than Stevie is. I think Stevie has struggled with his confidence, but John's also knee deep in this issue, and it's going to be taking away his ability to focus. I like, you look on the bottom half of the draw, you see some Americans. I actually think Tommy Paul versus Grigor Dimitrov is a good matchup for Tommy. Francis Tiafoe versus Andreas Sepi, I think is actually really good. I like Francis to make a little bit of a run. I get he can be so up and down, and he didn't win his first match. I get that part. I actually think I look at him as having a great opportunity here. He plays Sepi, then he'll play the winner of that match, play Millman Basilashvili. And that little group has Dimitrov and Basilashvili as the seeded players. And then then you get out of that, and Medvedev is going to be the guy that I still think from that quarter, more so than Berrettini or Paire or Ruud. I think that Medvedev's got a really good quarter. The bottom quarter, I will tell you, Tennis Sangren's playing with a lot of confidence, and he plays Bautista Agut in the first round. I mean, that's a tough matchup, I think, for Bautista Agut, but I think his steadiness will come through. You look at some of the other, the other Americans, Bradley Klahn, I'm not confident that he's going to be able to play his way through. Michael Mmoh, Mitchell Kruger, some of these wild cards. Sebastian Korda playing Dennis in the first round, I think it's going to be a fun match.
Yeah.
They both have their moments in their head. And I think Sebastian's playing with a lot of confidence right now. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see that match. I think it's going to be fun. I do think it's Novak's tournament to lose.
Right.
I think he's going to, his second round match is the winner of Kyle Edmund, Alexander Bublik. I mean, Kyle Edmund today is not the Kyle Edmund of 2 years ago.
Right. Right.
So I think the one part that I look at also is doubles on the men's, and then we'll go to the women's side for a second. But doubles, Mike and Bob Bryan there, to me, is really, is a standout issue. I look at that and it's, Mike and Bob have played events that I've worked on for 23 years or 24 years since they were in high school, and they accepted a wild card to play in the old AT&T Challenge in 1996 in Atlanta. But seeing them not play is tough, and watching them retire. But I wish them the best. They have been so great for the game of tennis.
One other guy, Bill, that we didn't talk about is Jack Sock. And as we know, watching World Team Tennis, and Luke Jensen was a big part of our TennisONE app during World Team Tennis. Obviously, Jack on the doubles court, on the mixed doubles court, phenomenal. Probably one of the best doubles players in the world. Probably the biggest forehand we've ever seen, as far as just racket speed and how fast he hits that thing. You don't agree?
Look, he has a big forehand. I'll say that.
Yeah. Well, Luke thinks it's gigantic, but of course he played for Luke. But,
correct.
But as we talk about Jack, does Jack have a run in him? I mean, this is a talented guy.
I think Jack has a lot of talent. I just don't think he's got a run in him. I think he's still struggling from confidence on the singles side. I don't think he's moving his well.
Right.
Single side. I think for doubles, it's not as big of an issue. I just don't think he's. I mean, Jack I think lives now in Charlotte. He lives near me. Yeah. I like Jack. He's a good guy, but I just don't think he's got it in him for a run as much as I think some Americans would like to see that. I think that his game is right now in doubles, unless he can start doing some things a little bit better. I'm not sure who he plays in the first round. So you have to forgive me. I'm trying to look it up real quick.
Cuevas.
Yeah. That's not a guy who I'd want to play, to be honest, if I was him.
Right.
I don't think that guy gets a lot of balls in play, and it's just going to create problems for Jack and his, creating errors.
Yeah. Last American we didn't talk about is Taylor. We're talking about a guy that can bomb a serve and win a lot of free points. It's this guy.
Really can. Look, I like Taylor. I think Taylor is a talented player. He's playing Dominic Kopfer in the first round. I think that's a good matchup. It's not a great matchup for him. It's a good matchup. The next round, I think he's got a great. The winner of that match, I think, is going to have a great opportunity playing the winner of Simone Safwat. I think it's a really good. Look, if Taylor can win, I think Kopfer is going to be much more difficult for him.
Right.
Than I think a lot of people give Dominic credit for. So I think if he wins that, look, that's a good little eighth for him, because that's the same as Shapovalov. I think Taylor could win some matches, but again, his consistency has struggled. I'd love to see him win. I'm just not sure he may have a little run, but I don't know that he's got a big run in him.
Right. Okay. Well, let's go over to the women. And again, we've talked to Mark Lucero, a great to you. We talked to Luke. We talked to Craig Carden. A lot of folks at Sven Gronfeld. I've gotten some opinions from some of the greatest, obviously the greatest coaching minds of all time.
Much better coaching minds than mine.
Don't sell yourself short. But talking to those guys and talking about the women's draw, they think it's absolutely, and nobody disagrees, absolutely wide open. 20.
Oh my gosh, it's amazingly how wide open.
20 players maybe could win this, and I'd love to focus again, if we can, as much as we can, on the Americans. Alex Gruskin of Crack Rackets. I don't know if you know Alex.
Yeah.
He asked me if I thought we were in one of the golden eras of women's tennis, knowing that, I'm kind of old and I was following tennis back in the Christian Martin era. I didn't really know what to say. Didn't feel like I was the right person to answer that question. But I think Gruskin was talking about, in terms of depth right now, there are a lot of players, whether it's a Jess Pegula or a Cici Bellis or you name it. There are a lot of players out there on the women's side that can make some noise and make a run. So I'd love, Bill, to talk about some of those players. I mean, if you look at the top of the draw, there's Cici Bellis and Jen Brady right there.
Yeah, look,
I think up there.
First off, I'm really upset because I'm older than you. And if you're saying you're kind of old, that means that I'm really in big trouble. So I just want that needs to be on. I think that the opportunity this year on the women's side, I think on the men's side, I think it's Novak and then just a lot of other people.
Right.
I think on the women's side, there is not one player I look at and I go, oh my gosh, that person is truly in their zone. Novak hasn't lost this year. He has not lost in this calendar year. And it's almost September. And I get we missed many months of tennis, but that's still amazing. Pliskova as the top seed and Kenin as the second seed. Pliskova did not look great in her in her play so far this summer in her comeback. I actually like Kenin. She lost in first round in the Western and Southern. I look at Ken. This is a great opportunity for Kenin. I think she's going to play well. I'm very confident about her. I would have put Osaka on that side of the draw before this issue. I think she's been playing well. But you look at the top half of the draw. Yeah, you have Jen Brady. You've got I will say it. I know this is Coco Gauff. She's in an area with Osaka. She plays Sevastova in the first round. Good player. That's I think I don't. Ali Risk is in the top half of the draw, and she's in the top 16 seeds.
Yeah.
And I don't. Maybe Kvitova, but she just how prepared is her game? A lot of people haven't just played enough, I think, to be in a position to have that mental fortitude. So you look at some of these players, and you look on the bottom side, Serena. I still think it's the U.S. Open. You're still going to have to go through Serena. The one thing she will not have at this is the crowd, and I think that that's always been a great thing for her, to have the crowd. I think not having the crowd hurts her. I just do. I think it's going to be. I think obviously I think she's the best player, greatest women's tennis player. But I think not having the crowd is going to be difficult for her.
Yeah.
And especially if you get older.
It wasn't Lexington. Sorry. It wasn't Lexington for sure when she lost to Shelby. And one other thing about Serena now is she still has that competitive fire. She always will. She wouldn't have played that tournament and been fist pumping if she didn't. But I felt like when Shelby won, Serena was a little softer, with congrats, Shelby. Not that she doesn't do that. I'm just saying she didn't seem as down as Serena normally is after a loss. She doesn't like losing, and she's
No,
never
I think losing this
player.
Western and Southern, she related it to, having a bad boyfriend or bad date or something like that.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
I still think Serena, because of her competitive fire and it being the U.S. Open and playing in that environment, and regardless of whether there are a lot of fans there, there's still going to be pressure, and
Right.
you're going to still have the pressure of playing in the U.S. Open. So I look at her as having, and we talk about on the men's side how some of the players, Roger, Rafa, Novak, you look at that and you go, oh my gosh. For the women, they still look at Serena and go, I got to play Serena,
Yeah, absolutely.
and she's still the big dog in that respect.
Bill, I agree. Serena is Serena, and this is the U.S. Open. So players are still going to look at her as a Rafa, Roger, Novak, Maria Sharapova, Venus. There's always the Serena factor, without a doubt. If you look at the other Americans, I'll be honest with you. Madison is a seed. Sloane is a seed. There's so many Americans that are seeded. You mentioned Ali Risk. I don't, Coco Golf. I wouldn't even, Shelby Rogers, Madison Brengle. I wouldn't even know. If somebody asked me which one of those players could make a run, you know what I'd say? I'd say probably any of them.
I think you're right. I think that any of them could. I mean, I'm just looking at the draw right now. I mean, many of them could. I mean, Jessica Pegula is a fighter.
Oh yeah.
And she's got a pretty good draw, in my opinion. Until the third round, where she potentially could play Kvitova. But I think Jessica's got a really good draw in there. And looking at Kennan's draw, I mean, just going back, she plays Wickmeyer to start out, and then she plays the winner of Zvonareva Fernandez. To be honest, she could be playing two girls that are at on the way part of the down part of their career. I mean, I like Wickmeyer, and it's not, but you start looking at these players and you just what they have in place. This is where I'm kind of the top half of the draw, I think, is just wide open. No, I'm not sure Francesca Di Lorenzo is going to make a big run for the Americans, but or Caroline Dolehide, but there's a number of others that I think will do very well. I mean, CC, I'd love to see. I think everybody's kind of hoping CC plays well, but I think she still hasn't shown it yet.
Right. Okay, Bill. Well, this has been fun, and we'll hopefully we'll keep in touch during the Open, see how some of this pans out.
If I'm successful, I will stay in touch. If my comments are way off, then I'm going to be off the grid.
All right. Well, Bill, always a pleasure, and I'm sure we'll be talking on a more informal level sometime soon.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Randy.